the big problem with the durability thing is like, oh shit, I got this like big blue glowy lance and it does a bunch of damage and it looks really cool. And for some people who might even care, like, it looks cool with my character. Like I because there's a lot of costumes you can get in those games, and it's like, well, I made my Link look this way, and now he's got this cool weapon that goes with it. But it's like half the time you don't even want to use the cool weapons because they're just gonna break, like, after, like, you know, maybe 20, 30 hits or something. So you end up with all of the best weapons just sitting in your backpack, like, and you end up just saving them for, like, fucking Ganondorf at the end of the game or some shit. And then you just end up using, like, you know, like, basic broadsword 1, basic lance 2. Like, these are the weapons that you actually end up using for the whole game. And I think that's really the big issue, is that it's taking away the ability for players to, like, make choices as to what they want to use, because even though it makes it seem like, oh, now players will have to make more calculated choices, I don't feel like that it actually promotes that as much as they think.
Yeah, a couple things come to mind. First, you're not allowed to talk about Dark Souls for the rest of the episode. Second, I totally see your argument there being the actual design intent behind it. With, you know, we want to come up with a bunch of these cool weapons, and the player's just not going to use any of them. If some are just better than others and they never break, you know, they're just going to find something good, and then they'll never use anything that's a lower class than that. So the other option is to make sure that all the weapons are so interesting and kind of balanced and good in their own way that they're all applicable in different situations. But, like, that's a huge design ask. And maybe that's not the intent.
That's what's good in Dark Souls, I'm just saying.
Yeah, it sounds interesting that it's having kind of an opposite effect, where instead of not using the bad weapons because you already have a good one, you're not using the good weapons because you don't want them to break and you want to save them for later. So one of those tricky situations where you're like, here is a solution that will solve the problem we want to solve, but oops, we caused a kind of symmetrical problem with it. And it reminds me of, because I used to play a ton of Dark Cloud growing up, and I will not defend that game, but definitely the worst thing about it was the weapon break mechanic. And the way that game functioned was you could upgrade your weapons, you could put a ton of extra stats in them over the course of the entire game, and in fact your character, it's an RPG kind of dungeon crawling game, and your character doesn't get stronger outside of just your total number of health. And you have, like, a defense stat, but that's it. So over the course of the game, you're getting these rare one-of-a-kind item kind of things that will increase your max health pool. So you start with, like, 90 health and you end the game with, like, 170. And you might start with, like, 9 defense and you end the game with, like, 60 defense or something. But all of your damage output, everything was just in whatever sword you were using or hammer or whatnot. So your character kind of that you're playing as is like this sword that you're leveling up. Mm-hmm. And then they put a weapon break mechanic in the game. So what starts off in the first dungeon as friction, oh, that sword broke, I'll have to use a different sword or wait till I find another one because I don't have any and I just have my default dagger now. By the time you're halfway through the game, you lost the game if your weapon breaks. You're not starting over on that weapon and building it up. Like, that's just way too big of a time investment. It's expensive to buy the materials that you need to upgrade the stats as you're getting experience for the sword and leveling it up. So you would reach a point where you break your sword and, like, you're on the moon. I forget what the dungeon on the moon is called. But you'd break your sword there and you're like, well, I'm reloading my save straight up. Just under no circumstances do I continue with my sword broken. It's too punishing. It feels like one of those JRPG games, or XCOM, like you mentioned before we started recording, where you have your dude you've built up you really like, and then he suffers permadeath in combat, and you don't have that guy anymore. It felt like that, but the means to recovery was just too long. So that, to me, is kind of an interesting situation where it definitely is a friction mechanic at the start of the game, and then it's way, way more than that at the end. But even at the start of the game, I don't really see the value in the friction of your weapons breaking. Like, I never found that to be an interesting or appealing part of that game.